Malik sir, it's 12 o'clock. Shall we start?
Yes, let us start.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon all, and welcome to this first PIC Adda of 2021. Before we start, I'll give a quick introduction to PIC, Pune International Center. It's basically a think tank of Pune. As we know, Pune has an auspicious presence of leaders from all walks of life, such as arts, culture, education, law, engineering, politics, commerce, knowledge-based services, and so on. PIC is basically a meeting place for all such great minds, a place where a peaceful and intellectually stimulating environment, discussion, and debates can be held about future of this great city, of this great nation, and of course, this world. Keeping this objective in mind, PIC was formed in 2010, and there are around 300 eminent personalities from Pune who have joined PIC. The objective of PIC is multifold. It works as a platform to create open discussion forums to stimulate debates by mobilizing the intellectual resources. It also promotes activities and programs with strong emphasis on involvement of youth. It undertakes and organizes conferences, seminars, lectures related to socio-economic topics as well as cultural developments of the city of Pune in particular and country in general. It also undertakes and facilitates publications of newsletters, research papers, books, journals, and so on different topics of interest. It establishes and maintains a library and information services as well. You can use this resource also from the internet website of PIC. It offers prizes and it also grants scholarships, which are also a part of the objective of this particular center. There are various verticals of PIC, such as social innovation, energy and environment, science and technology, policy research, national security, and so on. Under these verticals, PIC Adda is also one such vertical where we invite an eminent personality to elucidate a particular topic and to stimulate good discussions on recent topics. Today we have with us one such personality, Dr. Raman Gangakhedkar. For this event, we have a panel with me today comprising of Dr. Amitav Malik, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, and Mr. Abhay Vaidya. Dr. Amitav Malik is an Indian defense technologist and he is known for his expertise in defense system design and development, especially laser-based weapons and laser-guided weapons. He is a Padma Shri awardee in 2002 and he is a founder and a trustee of Pune International Center. Before I request him to introduce a speaker to you, I request all the audience to kindly keep their phone in mute mode. And the questions that you may have, you can kindly put it in the question and answer box, which is there on the screen. We will take the question and answers at the end of this particular talk. Now I request Dr. Amitav Malik to introduce the speaker of today, please. Dr. Malik.
Thank you, Sangeeta. And let me add my good morning to all. Dr. Gangakhedkar, my welcome to you again. And we are so happy to have you with us today. This PIC Adda we started almost more than around 10 years ago. And it has been a monthly event for the PIC members and their families. Of course, nowadays, because of the COVID, we are doing it online. But otherwise, it has been a very rich experience. We are looking forward to your talk on the COVID vaccine, the lessons that we can learn from the academia and industry. So allow me to briefly introduce you to the public. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Raman Gangakhedkar is an eminent Indian scientist and a very respected epidemiologist of our country and abroad. Basically, after MBBS, he also took a master's in public health from Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore, USA. In between, his interest in the epidemiology made him director in charge of the National AIDS Research Institute, and then in 2018, he was appointed head of epidemiology and communication disease wing of the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR. In his 2 year stint with the ICMR, he was active in handling the Nipah virus we have heard about, and of course, the latest, the coronavirus. He has also worked at the National Institute of Nutrition, Hyderabad, and in the National Institute of Immunology in Mumbai. There is a Pune touch. In the early 80s, when he began his research on HIV and AIDS, these were not very well known areas, and he worked with the National Institute of Virology and National AIDS Research Institute, Pune, and that was his going back to. Of course, as you just now heard, he served as director in charge of the National AIDS Research Institute, and in 2018, he was appointed head of epidemiology in the ICMR, and of course, he also is the recipient of Padma Shri for his very excellent work in the service of the nation. So, with this, Dr. Ganga Khatkar, may I please request you to take on, and we will stand by to listen to your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll just load the presentation. I'm grateful to all of you to have invited me to deliver a talk on a burning issue that's affecting almost the entire world, and a solution which we have found as COVID vaccine. Perhaps it has lot many learnings for industry as well as academia. I wanted to keep the whole thing broad rather than being very technical, but I don't know. At the end of it, perhaps you might find it has become little more academic than anything, because you're used to providing evidence for whatever you say, and that becomes a handicap all through. If you look at the backdrop in which we were operating, you find that in 2020, the entire world woke up to a harsh new reality. The first response to control the evolving pandemic was through non-pharmacological interventions. They were essentially not, truly speaking, the classical health-related interventions. You found that these interventions were used even in Spanish flu, and the same thing actually flowed through in the recent era as well. The initial emphasis was on repurposed drug testing. Now, I must admit, at that time when I was driving the research response, my director general had also asked me, do you think what should we prioritize? And even Dr. Vinod Pal had asked me the same question. I said we thought I would perhaps prefer repurposed drugs rather than vaccines, because vaccines take a long period of time to actually deliver, and our focus has to be more towards repurposed drugs. But eventually it turned out to be wrong. It was that it was fraught with failures one after another, and the result is very much seen today. If you look at the dashboard for COVID-19, you find today there are 11 crore individuals who have been infected so far. Perhaps we have lost about 25 lakh people to this dreaded infection across. We rank second in terms of numbers, which is not a big surprise, but still it's something which affects our own industrial response as well. And at the same time, you find even smaller countries are showing large number of cases and deaths because of this particular infection. When we say that non-pharmacological interventions, were they effective or not, if you ask me, sustenance of non-pharmacological interventions is one of the most challenging tasks. And if you look at the current curve, perhaps it's a reflection of all those 10 countries which has high disease burden of COVID-19 so far. Though it is also true that majority of the countries excepting Brazil are on a decline as of now, but nobody among us can still say, we can still climb back again if we have a variant which could be of a kind which doesn't respond, which cannot be controlled by the vaccines that we are providing as of now. But the message to drive in is non-pharmacological interventions continue to be difficult to sustain. And at that juncture, when you think in terms of developing vaccines, you look at the vaccines, when you want to produce them against viruses, our so-called success rates have been little difficult to come by, and it takes a long time of research to actually produce a vaccine. Look at the common diseases: polio, then Ebola, HIV, SARS-CoV-1, MERS. They were ones which challenged us all the time. We were in the quest of having an ability to produce vaccine rapidly. SARS-CoV-2, after the success in Ebola, SARS-CoV-2 actually provided us an opportunity to ensure that we produce vaccine quickly. And this time it didn't take decades to produce a vaccine, but it took only 10 months time to produce these vaccines as such. But when you produce these vaccines so rapidly, one of the things which we need to understand how they have been produced is, one issue is that the scientists were interested in producing vaccine against another pandemic of HIV, and they started working from 1990s on different vaccine product development platforms, and these platforms were pluripotent. And unfortunately, we couldn't develop a vaccine against HIV because the virus is very smart. It keeps on changing. But we were successful in developing vaccine against Ebola to a larger extent in a very short period of time. And then one of the things which happened once China reported the first cluster of cases in the month of January, they also managed to sequence this virus by 15th of January. And within 15 days of reporting, NIH, Oxford scientists, and Chinese scientists, they started working on development of vaccines along with other commercial companies as such. Though the technological advancement has led to large number of candidates that we could develop, the urgency impacted the undertaking of vaccine trials. And in order to cut short on time, most of the manufacturers, they went in for processes that could be run parallelly. But the rapid spread that occurs in this infection also was an enabling factor to ensure that the vaccine trials are completed in the shortest possible time, because you had a high incidence of this infection across the world. If you look at what were our traditional platforms before, we used whole inactivated virus, we used live attenuated virus, protein subunit vaccines, and virus-like particles so far in the past. But this time, you find the entire thrust is towards the new generation platforms that have been developed, that is viral vector, DNA, and RNA, especially mRNA vaccines as such, and antigen presenting cells. And these were the ones which were tried first for HIV. Though they were unsuccessful, these technologies existed and they have been used rapidly. What is the learning for academia and even the policymakers as such? India needs to develop rapid vaccine as well as rapid drug development platforms against emerging and re-emerging infections. We must remember that India has a high potential to have these emerging and re-emerging infections, mainly because of urbanization that is following, the dwindling of forest, and it is getting reflected all the time by Kasnur forest disease, which occurs essentially in 5 states on the west side in southwest region of India, and even the Nipah, which occurred, and now you have COVID-19, which is also a product of similar zoonotic approaches, zoonotic diseases. Now, what is the learning? The new vaccine development platform that we have been so far using in COVID, actually, the newer vaccines actually are based on old technology, because we have developed successfully one which was Covaxin. Now that's an old platform. We need to invest in development of newer vaccine development technology, and mRNA platform appears to be promising and may impact vaccine delivery in future, because you can actually combine more than one vaccine. If mRNA actually becomes successful in this particular COVID-19 endeavor very strongly, you will also find that it would become very easy to even manage oncology related issues, those related to malignancy. One of the good features is Genova with MCure is developing an mRNA vaccine of a different kind, where the virus where the mRNA that they are using is a replicating mRNA by itself. We need to actually invest a lot into these newer platforms in India. If you look at attributes of an ideal vaccine, it needs to be highly efficacious. This is like a wish list that you would have. It should have durable, preferably lifelong protection. The take, that is success of the immunization, should be high among old people, the patients with chronic morbidity and immunocompromised hosts, which are by and large tend to have a slightly lesser immune response that comes to vaccination. And lower adverse events, at least severe adverse events should be lesser. Usual cold chain and storage requirements should also be one of the major features, and it should be cheaper so that you can afford taking this vaccine. If you look at where we are, currently we have more than 200 vaccine candidates that are in different phases of development, in addition to what have already been developed. You look at preclinical development, you find there are 287 candidates which continue to remain in preclinical development. And in phase 3, you have only about 12 vaccine candidates which are currently there, in addition to the 8 that we have already approved. Where are we with the early interim results so far in 2021? COVID-19 pandemic was such a desperate situation that WHO, when it tried to find out what kind of efficacy should a vaccine have if you are going to use in public health, and the answer was you could have any vaccine which has more than 50% protective efficacy. But over a period of time, when the vaccines were actually developed, it was a big surprise that majority of these vaccines had an efficacy, that is ability to protect individuals. The number was 90 to 95 people would be protected against severe disease if 100 have received this particular vaccine. Though they had issues related to storage, they had issues whether they had tried it in different countries so as to ensure that the regulators can approve these vaccines very quickly in different countries. And these vaccines belong to different platforms. Pfizer and Moderna are based on mRNA vaccine. AstraZeneca and Sputnik V are using spike protein genes encoded in adenovirus. They are using different adenoviruses. Bharat Biotech and Sinovac are inactivated vaccines. These are traditional platforms. One of the questions that emerged during the process was, if we looked at the data of protection, it was found first in Pfizer and then later in Moderna that even after receiving first dose, within 12 days, the protective efficacy is high enough. And then people started questioning, would I need second dose then? And then people also started looking at one issue, that have we ever used vaccines that are given a long duration apart between two dosages? If you look at what we have done in the past, we have actually given the second dose pretty late, even for other childhood immunization vaccines. And people thought that could be useful. And the approach continued that you needed to have two-dose vaccine. But the risk that Johnson & Johnson took as a commercial company is something which is really admirable. They went for a choice of a single dose vaccine. One of the things which we have to understand, a single dose vaccine has high acceptability. You can have high coverage when you go for a single dose, and the ease of scaling up continues to be extremely high. So one of the issues that tends to emerge is, what should we invest in? What is something which is more feasible to provide it to people should be one of the issues that needs to be thought of when you develop these different vaccines. What do these vaccines which have come up of late, what do they protect us from? They protect us from development of severe COVID-19 and thus in death that could occur because of severe COVID-19 infection. But we still do not know about the protection from infection. It is possible that you need, since this is a respiratory virus, you need IgA antibodies to come up, which may not be coming because you're giving intramuscular infection as such. Though there are small evidences that have come from Moderna trial as well as AstraZeneca trial that yes, it may be protective to some extent, but it is unlikely that they would protect everybody as of now, as it appears. It is unlikely that it would completely protect one from getting infection. It may just produce, the infection may though just produce a mild infection, but it doesn't protect us from transmission of infection as such. Now the learning is the route of infection is extremely critical in vaccines. No, if you look at respiratory or gastrointestinal infections, you must have vaccine that protects you in the route itself. Nasal vaccines should have been one of the first prominent research efforts. Fortunately for us, Bharat Biotech is one of the companies which is actually trying to undertake phase 1 and 2 trials of a nasal vaccine candidate that they have developed. It is possible that if this becomes successful effort, then perhaps breaking the chain of transmission would be possible using these nasal vaccines, which would also have additional features of ACE and scale up, which might become very easy. Now, the moment the vaccine started developing, historically, what happened in last 1 year? Suddenly, people started thinking in terms of vaccine efficacy and vaccine coverage that you would need in a fast-moving, rapidly spreading outbreak. And people start that if you would have a herd immunity, you will perhaps from natural infection, and then if you add few percent people from the vaccine immune response, you might be able to ensure that the infection would be controlled. And then what essentially happened was the challenge that came for researchers and manufacturers was if you actually look at what proportion of people are currently infected, perhaps those who are exposed, those who have antibodies are likely to be 15% of the global population in 13 months. So it essentially means you would require a larger proportion to be protected by provision of vaccine, though it also meant that within 13 months, if about 110 crore people are likely to have been infected, this number comes from the underestimation that tends to be there from reported cases. You find that it is a geometric rate of progression. So there is a big worry. Normally, vaccine development requires 10 to 15 years time. But when you go for a rapid development of vaccine and so many groups are working, you will find estimating demand for vaccine is also going to be extremely challenging for manufacturers. Manufacturers also would have first mover advantage and they need to produce the vaccine fast. And that was a ask of this particular outbreak. And that's how perhaps issues have arisen even in this particular area. Now, if you actually look at what would be the vaccine production capacity in terms of billion dosages that large majority of these countries which are vaccine manufacturers can produce in 2021, you find US has a capacity to produce about more than 4.7 billion dosages by 2021. India has about more than 3 billion dosages that it can produce. China has 1.9 billion dosages. Rest of the countries have little smaller numbers that tend to come in. When you have limited capacity, what will happen? You find that the race of advance booking of vaccines by countries, it tends to start right away. A country like Canada booked the vaccines as 5 vaccine dosages per capita. And if you actually look at the data that tends to emerge today, even if they booked for larger number, their requirement is not being met mainly because of vaccine nationalism that has followed subsequently. If you actually look at another issue, how much of time actually was spent in vaccine trials itself, which used to require about 7 years, 6 to 7 years time so far to do clinical vaccine trials. If you look at different vaccines, you find that majority of them required about 6 to 7 months of time to complete the vaccine trials. Pfizer actually took a lead, started early. Unfortunately, AstraZeneca faltered in between. The trial had to be stopped, and the result was that they got delayed in the whole process, though all of them almost began similarly at this particular juncture when the vaccine development had started. Researchers, in order to facilitate undertaking of clinical trials, what is it that would be a learning lesson for researchers? We need to develop and refine clinical trial designs. We need to invest on development of adaptive designs, event-based trials which are based on Bayesian statistics, capacity to utilize big data analytics as sample size for phase 3 clinical trials is huge. It's about more than 40,000. You can imagine that the number of data points would be so high to undertake analysis as such. Use of artificial intelligence to facilitate from selection of trial sites, because this kind of a pandemic which is rapidly spreading would have different sites where the outbreak would be severe at a given point in time. And these sites keep on changing. So I should be in a position to predict where all should I start my sites and when should I start in order to ensure that I complete my trials very quickly. Digital technology to conduct trial and essays, serious adverse event recording as well as site monitoring is another issue which we need to prioritize as an action in order to improve the future of conduct of clinical trials. The rapid vaccine development also impacts assessment of adverse events, especially at the backdrop of newer vaccine platforms. Now, what is important is it adds challenges also in terms of production of required vaccine dosages and scaling up of delivery, because you have two dosages which are to be given 28 days apart. So how would one provide these kind number of dosages for any given center is also a bigger challenge. And as it is, it's an adult vaccination. And when these things happen, when you have a rapidly spreading outbreak and there is a panic in the society, you find that it gives rise to either high risk eagerness, high vaccine eagerness, or also vaccine hesitancy. It all depends on risk perception as well as the perception related to adverse events that tend to occur. Now, if you look at vaccine eagerness, you will classically find that in countries where the outbreak has been severe currently, you find that the vaccine eagerness is very, very high compared to those countries where the outbreak is on a decline at this point in time. Now, if you look at vaccine hesitancy, when people try to find out what are the reasons why people would not take a vaccine against COVID-19, one of the issues is lack of clarity about side effects and the fear that somebody may have serious adverse event. It would also be that some people get dissuaded mainly because the vaccine trials have occurred very rapidly. They perceive that it may not be very effective. When the infection is on a decline, many of them would feel that I may not get COVID because the infection is on a decline. Why should I take a vaccine? And there is a traditional group which is against vaccines, especially among adults. And they would always be anti-vax groups which would which would have a marked hesitancy across in the world. One of the things that happened in last 1 year was we forgot to look at the classical approach which was described in 1996 of evolution of a vaccine program. We forgot how to increase the coverage, how to bring in confidence among people so that the rollout can happen very rapidly. We forgot also another issue, that uptake of free H1N1 vaccine, which we had in Maharashtra. We found that it was pretty low when it comes to healthcare workers, when it comes to even people with chronic morbidity and pregnant women. This is despite the fact that the vaccine is provided free in Maharashtra state. You find the numbers are far too smaller if we were to think in terms of coverage rates. And the result is actually seen visible very much now. You look at the number of COVID vaccine dosages that have been administered so far. You find that if you look at US, which is leading as of now. They have been able to immunize about 6 crore odd people. The best performing state is Israel. In Israel, they have achieved almost 90% of coverage as of now. And the result is there is very little incident infection, new infection that is occurring in Israel. And India stands at place 4 in terms of number of dosages. But if it comes to proportion of people who have been vaccinated, we would be far lower. Now, if you actually look at the projected time that you would require to give these vaccines to 75% of the people, you will find that this is an interesting prediction that tends to come in. USA would have 75% of residents of USA who would be protected by vaccine by September end itself. Now, if you look at countries which are large enough, India would require probably around 10 years time if we go at the same pace. If you look at China, it will take 3.6 years time. And Canada, which had booked 5 dosages per capita, even they would require about 6 years period to complete immunization of 75% of people in that country. So essentially, the dynamics are related to vaccine nationalism, related to vaccine hesitancy, which is going to affect to a larger extent. But what is the implication for the industry? The fear that it would have is wastage of production, wastage of investment that might occur, and most importantly, it adds cost to the government if it is going to provide the vaccines freely. And vaccine hesitancy, therefore, is one of the key issues which needs to be handled well with community mobilization and a better group-specific communication strategy to ensure that people you reduce this vaccine hesitancy and acceptance increases. What is also key for industries to understand that there should be an early investment in interchangeability trials. What do we mean by interchangeability trials? That it is possible that in a given stage, you are providing vaccine X, and looking at the mobility and migration that we might have, if it is a 2-dose vaccine, a person may be found going to another state and he would like to take the vaccine there, but the vaccine could be vaccine Y. So essentially, it would mean if a 2-dose vaccine is to be taken, we may look at permutation combinations, do the clinical trial. Does it affect the interchangeability, and does it affect the efficacy and adverse events as well? And it is important for industry to understand that if you have a common platform for vaccine development, synergistic cutting of losses, if any, that could occur, would perhaps be a better option for them to think about. And additional learning even in that, even if one were to develop these vaccines rapidly in response to emergency, one of the issues is we need to think of solutions for every challenge that tends to come in. One of the challenges that we need to worry about is to innovate to overcome the challenges. One of the things which we have classically seen is Pfizer, when it developed this vaccine as the first vaccine, they had already developed specially designed temperature controlled thermal shippers utilizing dry ice, because their vaccine is based on mRNA, which is extremely sensitive to the temperature, and it could get degraded altogether, and that could be used for 10 days time. So they came with a complete package of solution. Not only that kind of solution, they also had GPS enabled thermal sensors which could actually track the vaccine shipment, look at the temperature, and ensure that you would have a complete control. The Pfizer thermal shippers that they used also ensured that you could keep these vaccines up to 30 days of storage by refilling the dry ice, which is something which they could manage to test within that short period of time, is probably more visionary and perhaps a lesson that all our companies have to learn to handle every issue that could come up with these vaccines. One needs to address other basic issues as well. One of the issues that Japanese people faced and even in USA they faced, there was a syringe shortage. And what does that essentially mean? A Pfizer vaccine has 6 shots. No, you can provide the vaccine to 6 different people, but your ability to draw the last dose depends on the quality of syringe that you are using. Japan is extremely worried about it. You look at US, even US has more worry because they are more likely to lose the last vaccine dose. And you need to actually think in terms of producing specialized syringes as one of the efforts for to ensure that the vaccine dose wastages do not occur. And that kind of a comprehensive thinking is necessary even for the industry. But is this the end of challenges? Perhaps not. You look at the recent events that have occurred in terms of rapidly transmitting variants. When the rapidly transmitting variants are coming, the herd immunities concept, which used to range between 58 to 74% of the seroprevalence of COVID-19, that has suddenly started changing. Since these new variants tend to spread rapidly, you need to have a rapid scale up of vaccine coverage, and the herd immunity cutoff would perhaps that you would require perhaps would go close to about 90% at this point in time. One must remember that there are 3 different mutants that we are currently worried about or talked of. One is UK variant, South African variant, and the last one is Brazil. Now here, one of the most important feature is South African variant perhaps has more of an immune escape, so vaccine may not remain effective against this particular South African variant, though AstraZeneca vaccine to some extent has some kind of protection that could come through, which is very much visible by AstraZeneca as well as Novavax vaccine has a better protection compared to others against this South African variant. What are the key learnings? One needs to undertake genomic surveillance in such infections. We need to test for neutralization of these new variants that tend to come. And we need to continue efforts to overcome escape mutants by developing different different vaccine dosages and ensure that if it remains as a 2-dose vaccine, the first dose may come from anything, but at least second dose could come, which could be able to neutralize these variants if the neutralizing antibodies are produced against it. Now, if you actually see today that which are the vaccines that are used globally largely, you find Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccine along with Moderna are being used heavily as of now. But this graphic presentation will change over a period of time. One of the main reasons is you find that there are second generation vaccines that are also coming up. You find that close to 287 of about 300 odd, 320 odd vaccines are even in preclinical development. Now they would try to overcome the variants that may come if there is an antigenic shift. A newer variant requiring a new vaccine would also be produced by them, and perhaps the safety and efficacy issues would also be equally well handled. The world currently is ramping up the capacity to produce vaccine by the end of 2021. If you see the list of countries on the left, you would be surprised to see now more and more countries are investing into producing vaccines by themselves. Though top 5 vaccine manufacturers based in USA, India, China, and France and UK are producing 74% vaccines, COVID vaccines, we need to look at the probable impact of these newer capacities. If these countries have invested in vaccine production, they're not going to close down. Now, what would it essentially mean? It would intensify competition for the traditional vaccines that we generate. It would enable access to newer technologies, and these newer countries may also try to understand how to survive given the fact that capacities to scale become effective. They are useful in ensuring that the industry sustains. And in these circumstances, it is possible they may focus to new niche areas where the survival might be easier compared to rest of the areas, because the cost that they can levy to the vaccine is likely to be higher. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. One of my major shortcomings while I was there at ICMR in 2.5 years time was Nipah occurred. Against Nipah, we learned a lot how to control that, because 1 year thereafter, there was a big scare in 2018 that Nipah would spread across in the countries, and the population density would make it very difficult to control this potentially fatal infection. But second year, we had learnt a lot. We had put our surveillance very well in Kerala. The public health action by the Kerala state government was extremely strong. The result was there was only one case that could occur. But unfortunately, learning those lessons, when we transformed them, we couldn't go ahead immediately because there was a Zika outbreak that occurred in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. We conceptualized that we need to develop research on One Health, and biosecurity needs to be provided in the region. We could not go ahead because COVID-19 suddenly struck, and there was no way we could diversify into newer area and could implement them well. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. The recent budget mentions the ICMR proposal that we want to establish National Institute for One Health, perhaps in Nagpur, where we had started one center. There would be 4 regional virology institutes so that the surveillance improves. It adds value to about 116 virus research diagnostic labs that ICMR has established across in the country. We had established 10 Southeast Asia region countries that start from Timor-Leste right up to India. All the region was covered for a research platform to ensure that we would have common surveillance protocol, we would have common tools of diagnosis. We would try to ensure that the learning that infections do not respect geographic boundaries. Unless if one wants to become safe, we have to ensure that others are safe in the region. That vision was also transformed into a research platform. But in this budget, they ensured that this becomes a part of the entire response, mainly because of COVID-19 outbreak. In conclusion, COVID-19 has created huge turbulence in all spheres of life, including science. It is going to impact the discovery science and public health approaches immensely. These learnings and their adaptation may potentially increase quality of life and lifespan, because we have understood more of newer technologies that have come, and they are likely to impact in near future immensely. Pune, if you ask me, is one of the ideal locations for an effective industry and academia partnership, and perhaps we can influence the science in a strong way, public health in a strong way across in the country and elsewhere in the region. Thank you. I'm sorry if it was long. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. No, it was not long. It was perfectly perfect. Let me thank you on behalf of PIC for an excellent talk, sir. Actually, you did cover right from the basics of it. What was the conventional approach? What is a new approach? Right from there, you could actually cover the statistical scenario in the country, also in the world, and also the interesting part of the innovations that have come along with this particular invention, which are the parallel innovations in terms of temperature controlled cabinets and the syringe issues and so on and so forth, and also of course the national efforts which are being taken in terms of new institutes coming up, the oneness issue and so on and so forth. So thanks a lot, sir, for a very, very good coverage in a very small time, I should say. So there are many questions, sir. I'll take them one by one.
Yeah.
So the first question is by Mr. Vilas Rajwade. He is asking, what are the top learnings for individuals like me? What are the adequate care that one should take?
Adequate care is adherence to COVID appropriate behavior. I don't need to specify more on that particular issue. If you are eligible to receive the vaccine, you should accept the vaccine, because there is no reason to believe it doesn't work. There is no reason to believe that it has high side effects as people are talking about. What is the key learning for a person as such? Key learning is, when somebody panics, when the panic is there in the community, the panic is, the fuel to the panic is added by social media. Now, please don't read social media messages that could be wrong. Please don't forward such messages. When you forward such messages, please ensure that you know the authenticity of this particular message. What is most important for us to understand is, even if you receive one report that somebody died because of vaccination, one must remember there is no denominator to that death, even if it is true. You find that the risk of such severe adverse events, if they are to occur, is so low that we need to reconsider. And the last issue that I would say is, this is one disease where we need to have a good individual risk benefit analysis. And every individual is able to do this risk benefit analysis. I think we need to be more rational while taking these decisions on protection, whether through COVID appropriate behaviors or by taking vaccine. We need to look at what is the true risk that is there, rather than perceived risk because of social media.
Okay, sir, thank you. The next questions, there are many questions by Mr. Amit. I will ask a couple of them. Any comments, he asks, on the recent surge in Amravati Vidarbha possible causes? He says that yesterday Amravati reported 600 plus cases. So any comment on the recent surge is what his question is.
There is one thing which I would say. You cannot have adequate data to make robust conclusions based on whatever we understand in such a short period of time. There could be multiple factors which may have had led to resurgence. It is a big surprise that entire Vidarbha region, which has comparatively lower population density and lower mobility as well. Now, despite that, the occurrence of resurgence in that area, its entire area, no, it's not only Amravati, it's Akola, Yavatmal, Buldhana, Nagpur, Wardha, all those regions are showing resurgence. Now, why could this be happening? This could also be an impact of removing the lockdowns. No? One must understand that when a decision is taken to open up schools and colleges, you will find that a new vulnerable population actually walks in there and becomes and could be exposed to the risk. And what is worse is their social networks are wide enough. And by the age, younger age itself, the tendency to be rebellious and say that nothing is going to happen to me is more seen among adolescents. And the result, you will find that the infection may spread. And we must also remember that people have developed COVID fatigue, and they don't want to continue with COVID appropriate behavior. Neither do they want to listen to the same advice, which is actually almost a non-medical advice. No? Wear mask, wash your hands. Anybody could give such advice, and they get bored by that. But believe me, the risk of having COVID is so bad that it is worth remembering that following COVID appropriate behavior is not going to harm you in any manner. It could protect you. Whether you get a vaccine or not, if you follow COVID appropriate behavior, you can reduce the risk of transmission close to about 70%, which is high enough.
Yeah, that is true, sir. Thank you, sir. A question by Mr. K.R. Nair. He's asking whether a person can take both 2 doses each of Covishield and Covaxin. Whether a person can take 2 doses of each, Covishield and Covaxin.
One, it is not possible now. because the supplies are restricted, they are controlled by the government. So once you take the vaccine, government would have complete data.
Yeah.
Is there a scientific rationale for that? Probably not. The reason why I say probably not is both the vaccines or all the vaccines that are currently being generated tend to rely on the immunogenicity of spike protein. Now, whether you deliver spike protein through adenovirus or through a whole virus which is inactivated, the issue is only difference in delivery as such. But they depend on only spike protein. Spike protein is a powerful agent protein that can produce a strong and vigorous response against SARS-CoV-2. So there is no reason to even think that if I take two different vaccines, I would be additionally protected. As I keep on saying, please follow COVID appropriate behavior, even if irrespective of vaccine status. No, whether you take vaccine or you don't take vaccine, the disease is more likely to become endemic. Given two-dose vaccines, it is unlikely that you can even forget about COVID appropriate behavior, though there is no scientific rationale for taking two different vaccines together.
Okay, thank you, sir. There is one more question. There are many questions by Mr. Amit. I'll ask only one more. Any comments or thoughts on new protein-based vaccine, Novax? Has the technology been tried before on large scale, or this will be the first major protein-based vaccine?
No, see, basically you have to understand that majority of the technologies that we are using are new ones, which also, for Novavax, perhaps it's a little tested kind of a technology. But do we need to really worry about it? No. All these technologies were being developed first against HIV, where they have been tried in tens of thousands of volunteers, though vaccine failed in HIV, but these vaccines were safe even in those clinical trials. So there is no reason for us to believe that they are likely to be associated with severe toxicities, which is more likely to be perceived because of new platforms that vaccine development has. So I would not worry about safety of these vaccines. And you perhaps must have read Novavax actually works well against not only the wild type strain, but even the other strains that have been found in South Africa and UK as well.
Okay. Thank you, sir. The next question is interesting, sir, from Meher Padamji. She's asking, why do we have different set of rules for landing from overseas within Maharashtra and landing in Delhi or Bangalore and flying into Maharashtra? Should it be the same across the country? Shouldn't we say it be same if we are to prevent COVID from spreading?
No, I wish I was I was able to control that. Ideally, the rules should be same.
Yeah.
But one must also remember that health is a state subject. So each state is empowered to take its own decision. Center can only issue guidelines, but it cannot force the state to follow those guidelines as such. So you will find some differences based on the perceptions of different state governments.
Yes, sir. And it's a valid question in the sense that it's a problem for the people who are traveling, but as you rightly say, sir, we don't have much control. The next question is from Nikhil. Are the short duration lockdowns effective? Like a night curfew, it is an administrative measure, or is it backed by scientific viewpoint?
No, scientifically, if you ask me, based on mobility related issues, it is unlikely to impact well enough. No, but at the same time, why are people going for, assuming, no, I am not in power at this particular point in time, But why do people think of putting in restrictions on Saturday, Sundays? That is only for two reasons. One, they think people tend to move on Saturday, Sundays in larger numbers, which may not be true. If you put restriction, people will shift that thing to the other days from Monday to Friday. Second issue that perhaps is also intended by the local administration is to try and remind them of COVID appropriate behavior by asking them to refrain from not going out during Saturday, Sundays. So there is some kind of a reminder call that sets in, and hopefully that works. But actually speaking, those 2 days may not make so much of difference.
Okay, sir. I think there is one. It is a comment probably. Pune is. This is from Mr. Anand Khandekar. Pune is indeed ideal for industry academia partnership. Pune is the first city where knowledge cluster is established. Recently, by principal scientific advisor, he has mentioned this cluster must take up biopharma as a key domain. At present, this domain is not included. Sir, it's only a comment, probably, if you want to.
I agree. In the conclusion, I said because I thought the presentation was going too long. I think all of us need to understand Pune has a strategic value for health in India. The main reason is you have IT industry, you have NCL, you have NIV in place, you have the supercomputer, you have people from CDAC who could help you in developing softwares, you have vaccine manufacturers, and you have a large drug industry or pharmaceutical industry here as well. I think the issue is we know our strengths. It is time we come together and act at this point in time. Now we have to take leadership, also contribute the best possible way to ensure that the nation becomes more healthier by Pune's contribution.
True, sir. True, sir. So last two questions. One is by Neeran Karnik. He says it seems like corona is spreading primarily through aerosol transmission, not via surfaces. Does this warrant a change in public health advice, like less emphasis on cleaning, sanitizer, 6 foot distance, and such all things, and more on masks or isolation?
No, see, it's very difficult to say um, what we call in our language as attributable fractions towards certain behaviors. No? We know in a given circumstance, both of them, no, if given a chance, both can spread as rapidly. But to make situation specific guidelines becomes as much difficult because we don't know how people will understand and how they will follow these guidelines. I think if it is that by following COVID appropriate behavior, we are going to help ourselves from getting less of respiratory infections, getting less of gastrointestinal, those that cause diarrhea, even they come down. It's worthwhile allowing people to follow both rather than saying that you do only one.
Yes, sir. Yes. There are many questions are coming up, but one more from Mangala Deshmukh. She asks, any research going on regarding interactions with medicines and effects on comorbidities?
No, which medicines? Because as I said, currently we don't have any specific antiviral drug which works against this particular infection. So drug interactions is not a big issue. If it is related to vaccines, there is no reason to believe that the vaccines lead to development of antibody. So other drugs are not going to be a major issue. If you are talking in terms of The drug-drug interactions that you might see when a patient is admitted and is provided supportive care, that is well known, and people tend to ensure that they are provided quality services considering the drug-drug interactions.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes. Uh, I think I can take one more question. We have time. Meher Kadamji, she has one more question. With Covishield, there is an article in today's paper that talks about 3 months between the first and the second shot to enhance the efficacy. When will this be pronounced as a policy? Today it is still just 28 days.
See, this is not a very well settled area in terms of findings. The early indications, they published a paper recently, perhaps 2 days back in Lancet, saying that even if you can give up to 3 weeks, you don't compromise on efficacy. But at the same time, one must also remember that the backdrop could be different. The backdrop there is, in different countries, they're not able to get vaccine in adequate dosages to provide. So for them, it provides you a leeway to postpone second dose up to 3 months time. Whereas in our country, if you actually look at our situation, we have Serum Institute, one of the world's largest manufacturers. They are providing Covishield in adequate numbers. People are not coming forward to take the same. Now, given these situations, I would perhaps not think of giving 3 months provision in India, because if you have seen even today, those who received first dose of vaccine, a very small fraction has come back to take second dose. Now that is happening among the healthcare workers especially. Now if that is the case with healthcare workers, if it is a common man, no, just imagine he
Yeah.
is to be reminded that he has to come back 3 months after, or let's say 2.5 months after. It might become extremely difficult to ensure that two dosages are administered. And as of now, we think of two dose strategies because they are proven. So I would wait for evidences to emerge rather than jumping to a conclusion that I can take the vaccine at any point in time. More often than not, the coverage rates are likely to become poorer, to my mind, if you increase the duration or the interval between two dosages.
Yes, sir. So there is a concern over overstock. Is it, sir? So there is one question by Geeta. She's asking, there is a concern over stock of vaccine not being used in time. So should NGOs or private industries, do you think that they should be involved in vaccination?
If you are asking my individual opinion, yes. I think in India, healthcare has a strong player in private healthcare industry. You find majority of the people continue to go to private sector for routine consultations, including vaccination. If we involve them, both of them together, perhaps scale up can happen very rapidly. At the same time, there is a threat that tends to come, because we would not know whether the prices that would be charged to the patients would be same as it should be, or would be provided at affordable cost or no cost. Second issue is, how will you monitor that? Third issue is, there is a fear that the moment you might open, given the fact that there is scarcity across in the world, some people may start developing fake vaccines. So government will have to take a call on what would be the best way to monitor the situation. But I don't think government is averse to having a public private partnership, which is currently being considered and discussed. Hopefully the decision will be taken quickly, and this would be extremely important given the vaccine hesitancy we have right now.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Uh, There are many other questions, and it is requested that you may contact independently later on to handle these question answers. Any specific comments by Dr. Vijay Kelkar sir, Dr. Amitav Malik?
Nothing particularly. It was fantastic, very educative, and very nicely put together. So thank you very much, Dr. Ganga Khetkar, from my side.
Thank you, sir.
Vijay sir, if you have anything to say. Probably not.
Okay, sir. So let me, on behalf of Pune International Center, thank you for an extremely good talk, sir. And a lot of information you really clubbed in a very good way. And that's why we could handle a lot of question answers also. Thanks a lot for your time, for your efforts, and for coming over on this